Amara Johnson stands frozen as millions watch, her 11-year-old frame dwarfed by the massive stage. The spotlight burns against her dark skin, while cameras capture her trembling hands. "Just sing for your supper, little girl." The famous white judge sneers, unaware his microphone is still hot. The audience gasps. Tears blur her vision, but something hardens inside her. She steps forward, takes a breath that seems to pull strength from generations before her, and opens her mouth. What happens next will not only change her life, but shake America to its core. The journey to this moment began 3 months earlier, on a bitterly cold Detroit morning, when Amara woke up shivering in the back seat of her grandmother Essie's old Buick Century, their home since being evicted from their apartment 6 weeks prior. The car windows were frosted with intricate ice patterns that might have been beautiful if they weren't also a reminder of how dangerously cold it was getting as winter approached. Amara's breath formed small clouds in the freezing air as she carefully shifted, trying not to wake her grandmother, who was finally sleeping after a night of painful coughing. At 67, Essie Johnson suffered from increasingly severe diabetes that made their homeless situation even more precarious. The small collection of pill bottles in the glove compartment was dwindling, and Amara knew they couldn't afford to refill all of them. Morning light was just beginning to break as Amara silently gathered her small toiletry bag and slipped out of the car, walking 3 blocks to the Shell gas station where the night attendant, Mr. Khalil, would sometimes let her use the bathroom to wash up before school. Today was a school day, and Amara was determined to go, even though they'd missed most of the previous week. Education was non-negotiable according to Grandma Essie, who had been a kindergarten teacher for 30 years before budget cuts eliminated her position. "Your mind is the one thing they can never take from you," she would remind Amara, even as they lost everything else. In the gas station bathroom, Amara carefully washed her face and brushed her teeth, then worked a comb through her thick coils, wishing she had some of the special conditioner that made her hair more manageable. The small bottle had run out weeks ago. She changed into her cleanest school uniform shirt, tucked away in a plastic bag to keep it presentable, and straightened her posture before the mirror. "You are brilliant. You are worthy. You are loved," she whispered, repeating her grandmother's daily affirmation, despite the hollow feeling in her stomach from having eaten nothing but a shared apple since yesterday morning. When she returned to the car, Grandma Essie was awake, her dark eyes sunken but still carrying that spark of determination that had kept them going. "Morning, sunshine," she said, her voice raspy. "Ready for school?" Amara nodded, though her thoughts were more preoccupied with how they would find food today. Grandma's Social Security check wouldn't arrive for another week, and the last of their emergency money had gone to insulin 3 days ago. They had been surviving on the kindness of a few church members who didn't know they were homeless but would coincidentally have extra food to share after Sunday service. Pride kept Essie from admitting their dire situation, though Amara suspected some people guessed the truth. Before her grandmother's health had deteriorated, they'd had a small apartment, and Amara had sung in the church choir every Sunday, her extraordinary voice earning her solos even among adults. Music had been her sanctuary, the place where she felt most herself, most connected to something larger. Now, those Sunday services were increasingly rare, as Grandma became too ill to attend regularly. "I was thinking," Amara said carefully as she helped her grandmother into the passenger seat so they could drive to a different parking location for the day, a strategy to avoid arousing suspicion. "I saw a poster yesterday about American Spotlight auditions coming to Detroit next week." American Spotlight was the country's biggest talent competition, a reality TV phenomenon that had launched numerous careers over its 15-season run. They're having open auditions at the convention center. Anyone can try. Grandma Essie gave her a gentle but skeptical look as she adjusted her glasses. "That's a nice dream, sunshine, but those shows cost money to enter, and they're looking for people with connections, fancy training." Amara shook her head, excitement momentarily overtaking her hunger. "No, I read everything. It's free to audition, and they're especially looking for undiscovered talent this season. I could sing, Grandma. I could win the food allowance they give contestants during the competition." She didn't mention the grand prize of $200,000 and a recording contract. That seemed too impossible. but the guaranteed meal plan for all contestants who made it past preliminaries felt like a lifeline within reach. Essie studied her granddaughter's face, recognizing the hope there, and couldn't bring herself to extinguish it despite her own doubts. "We'll see," she said, which was neither a yes nor a no. After dropping her grandmother at the public library where she could stay warm for the day, Amara walked the 12 blocks to Douglas Elementary, arriving just as the first bell rang. School had become both a haven and a challenge. A haven because it was warm, offered 2 meals through the free lunch program, and provided brief normalcy. A challenge because maintaining appearances grew harder each day, explaining why she wore the same clothes repeatedly, finding excuses for why parents couldn't attend functions, completing homework without a proper place to study. Today, however, school was secondary in her mind. During lunch, instead of eating, Amara slipped away to the music room where Miss Chen, the kind-hearted music teacher, occasionally let her practice. With the American Spotlight auditions just days away, Amara needed to prepare a song that would showcase her voice. She stood before the small, upright piano, closed her eyes, and began to sing "Amazing Grace," the hymn her mother had taught her before passing away from cancer 4 years ago. The pure, crystalline notes filled the empty room, building with a control and emotional depth that would have been remarkable in an adult performer, let alone an 11-year-old. What Amara didn't know was that Miss Chen had entered silently and stood listening, her hand pressed to her mouth in astonishment. When Amara finished, the teacher's quiet applause startled her. "You're planning to audition for American Spotlight, aren't you?" Miss Chen asked, having seen Amara studying the poster earlier. "With a voice like that, you should." The teacher's encouragement strengthened Amara's resolve. That afternoon after school, she walked to the convention center to get information about registration. The vast building was intimidating, its glass and steel exterior reflecting the cloudy sky, as Amara approached the information desk, where a white woman in her 40s sat tapping at a computer. "Excuse me," Amara said politely, "I'd like to register for the American Spotlight auditions next week." The woman, whose nameplate read Patricia Whitman, looked up with visible surprise, taking in Amara's worn uniform and carefully maintained but obviously old backpack. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" she asked with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Contestants under 18 need a parent or guardian to register." Amara swallowed hard. "My grandmother is my guardian, but she's not feeling well today. Can I take the forms to her to sign?" Patricia's smile thinned further. "I'm sorry, but she needs to be here in person. Those are the rules." The woman's tone suggested the matter was closed as she turned back to her computer, dismissing Amara entirely. Fighting back tears of frustration, Amara stood her ground. "Please, my grandmother is sick. She has diabetes. I really need to audition." The desperation in her voice must have carried because a man approached from a nearby office. "Is there a problem here, Patricia?" he asked, his kind eyes taking in the situation. Marcus Green, social services coordinator for the event, he introduced himself to Amara, extending his hand. Something in his manner suggested he understood more than was being said. "This young lady wants to register without a guardian present," Patricia explained, with barely concealed annoyance. "It's against policy." Marcus considered Amara thoughtfully. "What's your name?" "Amara Johnson, sir." "And you want to audition?" She nodded vigorously. "I'm a singer. My grandma Essie is my guardian, but she's too sick to come today." Marcus seemed to make a decision. "Patricia, remember that community outreach initiative the network is pushing this season. I think we can make an exception and let Miss Johnson take the forms home. I'll take responsibility for it." Patricia's lips pursed in disapproval, but she reluctantly pulled out a packet of papers. "Fine, but I'm noting the exception in the system." As she handed over the forms, she added with poorly concealed skepticism, "The competition is very fierce, you know. Thousands audition, and only a handful make it through." Marcus gave Amara an encouraging smile. "Why don't you tell us why you want to be on American Spotlight, Amara?" The question was simple, but loaded with meaning for her. With all the courage she could muster, Amara looked directly at them both and said, "If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" The rawness of the question hung in the air. Patricia's expression shifted from surprise to uncomfortable pity, while Marcus maintained his compassionate gaze. What Amara didn't see was Patricia discreetly pressing record on her phone under the desk, capturing the moment. The contestants who advance do receive meals during the competition, Marcus confirmed gently. But let's focus on your talent first. Take these forms home for your grandmother to sign, and bring them back before the deadline on Friday. As Amara clutched the precious registration packet and thanked them, she was unaware that Patricia was already texting the video to production staff with the message, "Wait till you see this year's charity case. Think she can sing for her supper?" Literally. Later, as Amara waited for a bus that would take her closer to the library to meet her grandmother, she overheard two teenagers, clearly fellow aspiring contestants based on their conversation, discussing the upcoming auditions. The girls, both white and wearing expensive-looking clothes, were comparing vocal coaches and previous competition experience when one noticed Amara and her registration packet. "Looks like they're really letting anyone audition this year," she said loudly enough for Amara to hear, flipping her straight blonde hair over her shoulder. "My dad says they have diversity quotas to fill," the other responded with a dismissive laugh. "Though I doubt they're looking for the homeless demographic." The cruel words stung, but Amara kept her expression neutral, a skill developed from months of hiding her circumstances. As the bus arrived, she boarded and found a seat far from the girls, clutching the registration forms like a lifeline. When she tried to enter the convention center again the next day to ask a question about the registration, a security guard named Thomas Reynolds stopped her at the entrance. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, blocking her path. "I have a question about my registration for American Spotlight," Amara explained, showing her partially completed forms. The guard looked skeptical. "You're not just here to loiter in the air conditioning. We've had problems with that before." The implication was clear, and it wasn't the first time Amara had faced such assumptions. "No, sir. I'm registered. See?" She pointed to the preliminary contestant number on her form. The guard reluctantly let her pass, but followed closely behind, as if expecting her to steal something. By the time she reached the registration desk, a different staff member informed her that all questions had to be submitted through the official website. The fact that Amara had no regular internet access wasn't their concern. That evening, Amara practiced in a small corner of a public park, singing quietly as the sun set, determined to perfect her audition piece despite the obstacles. A few passers-by stopped to listen, some tossing small amounts of change into her open backpack, assuming she was performing for money. Amara didn't correct them. The $1.37 would help buy her grandmother's medication. As darkness fell, she gathered her things and headed back to where they'd parked the car, her mind filled with the lyrics she'd been practicing and the hope that somehow, against all odds, her voice might be their salvation. The morning of the preliminary audition dawned with Grandma Essie in worse condition than usual, her breathing labored and skin ashen. "I'll be fine," she insisted when Amara suggested skipping the audition to take her to the free clinic. "This is your chance, sunshine. I've signed all the forms. You go make us proud." Reluctantly, Amara left her grandmother resting in the car, parked in the shade behind the public library where a security guard who had befriended Essie promised to check on her throughout the day. The convention center was transformed when Amara arrived. Enormous American Spotlight banners hanging from every surface and long lines of hopeful contestants snaking through the massive lobby. Production assistants with clipboards hustled about importantly, while camera crews captured the excitement for promotional materials. Amara joined the check-in line, her heart pounding with nervous energy, the registration forms clutched tightly in her small hands. When she finally reached the front, the clerk looked surprised at her appearance. She had worn her best outfit, a clean but clearly worn navy dress with a white cardigan that had belonged to her mother, her hair carefully styled into neat twists. "Guardian?" the clerk asked curtly. "She's sick," Amara replied, pushing forward the signed forms. "I have everything filled out correctly." The clerk frowned, checking the paperwork with obvious skepticism before reluctantly assigning Amara number 342 and directing her to waiting area C. What followed was an 8-hour ordeal of watching other contestants, many who had arrived after her, being called into the audition rooms while she continued to wait. Hunger gnawed at her stomach as the hours passed, but she was afraid to leave her spot to find food, terrified of missing her chance. Other contestants had brought lunches or had parents who made food runs, but Amara sat alone, conserving her energy and mentally rehearsing her song. A tall man with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit periodically entered the waiting area, consulting with production assistants before selecting contestants to audition next. Amara noticed a pattern. The selected contestants were predominantly white, many from visibly affluent backgrounds based on their clothes and equipment. When the man finally approached her section in the late afternoon, his eyes skimmed past Amara before a production assistant whispered something in his ear that made him turn back to her with sudden interest. "You must be Amara," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm Cameron Wallace, executive producer. I hear you have quite a story." Amara straightened her posture. "I'm here to sing, sir." Cameron's smile tightened. "Of course you are. But every contestant has a story, and stories are what drive ratings." He studied her for a moment longer. "You might be better suited for our urban programming initiatives rather than the main competition. Something more. Culturally specific." The implication hung in the air between them, but Amara held his gaze. "I just want a fair audition, please." Cameron seemed both amused and slightly irritated by her directness. "Well, you'll get one. Eventually." With that, he moved on, and Amara returned to waiting. It was nearly 6 in the evening when her number was finally called, the waiting area having emptied considerably. A production assistant led her through a maze of corridors to a room where 3 judges sat behind a long table. Veronica Mills, a successful black female music producer known for her no-nonsense approach but fair assessments. Richard Townsend, an elderly white industry veteran with decades of experience discovering new talent. And Bradley Harrison, the competition's most controversial judge, famous for his brutal criticism and rumored to have made racist remarks off-camera in previous seasons. Bradley looked up from his phone as Amara entered, his expression immediately dismissive. "Let's make this quick," he said before she could even introduce herself. "We're not running a charity here." Veronica shot him a sharp look before turning to Amara with a professional smile. "Don't mind him. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you'll be singing today." Amara stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly to stop them from shaking. "My name is Amara Johnson. I'm 11 years old, and I'll be singing Amazing Grace." Bradley rolled his eyes. How original. Another church singer. Richard gestured for her to continue despite the interruption. Taking a deep breath, Amara closed her eyes and began to sing. The pure, crystalline notes filled the room, her young voice carrying a depth of emotion that belied her age. The technical control was impeccable, perfect pitch, beautiful tone, and masterful modulation between soft passages and powerful crescendos. But it was the emotional quality that transformed the room, the way her voice carried generations of struggle, hope, and resilience in every phrase. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Richard's eyes were misty, and even Bradley seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Veronica was the first to speak. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" she asked, genuine amazement in her voice. "Church choir, ma'am," Amara replied softly. "My mama taught me before she passed, and then our choir director." Richard nodded appreciatively. "That was extraordinary. You have a natural gift that can't be taught." Bradley, however, had recovered from his surprise and leaned forward with a cold smile. "It was technically proficient, I'll grant you that. But this is a commercial enterprise, not a church fundraiser. What makes you think America wants to watch another sob story?" Veronica turned to him sharply. "Are you serious right now? Did you not hear what I just heard? This child has more raw talent than half the professional singers we work with." "Come on, Veronica," Bradley scoffed. "We all know why you're pushing for her. It's the same reason the network is pressuring us for more diverse contestants. It's affirmative action casting, pure and simple." The comment hung poisonously in the air. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably while Veronica's expression hardened dangerously. What none of them realized was that a production assistant had failed to fully close the door, and Bradley's comment was overheard by several staff members in the hallway, one of whom was recording the deliberations as standard procedure. "Step outside, please," Richard told Amara kindly. "We need to discuss." In the hallway, Amara could still hear their voices through the door. Veronica's raised in angry defense, Bradley's dismissive rebuttals, and Richard's attempts at mediation. After 10 minutes of debate, the door opened, and Veronica emerged with a tight smile. "Congratulations, Amara. You're moving forward to the next round. Registration will give you information about contestant housing and the competition schedule." The relief was overwhelming, but mixed with anxiety. "Does this mean I'll get meals?" Amara asked, the question that had driven her here in the first place. Veronica's expression softened with understanding. "Yes. All advancing contestants receive meal allowances and housing during the competition. You'll be taken care of." As Amara left the building clutching her advancement papers, she was unaware that footage of Bradley's affirmative action comment had already been leaked to a junior staff member's social media account, sparking the beginning of a controversy. She was equally unaware that Heather Davis, the show's head of publicity, was already in damage control mode, instructing staff to play up the homeless angle as a rating strategy while burying Bradley's comment. "The hungry black girl with the voice of an angel is television gold," she told Cameron in a hasty meeting. "We can milk this for weeks if we handle it right." Amara's mind, however, was solely focused on getting back to her grandmother with the good news. The bus ride seemed interminable as night fell, her excitement building with every block. When she finally reached the library parking lot, she ran to their usual spot only to find the car gone. Panic seized her until the friendly security guard approached, explaining that an ambulance had taken Essie to Detroit General Hospital after she'd experienced severe symptoms related to her diabetes. The world seemed to tilt beneath Amara's feet as her triumph transformed instantly to terror. Without money for a cab, she ran the 23 blocks to the hospital, arriving breathless and desperate at the emergency room entrance. It took an hour of pleading with hospital staff before a sympathetic nurse confirmed that Amara Johnson had been admitted and was currently stable but in serious condition. "Family only for visitors," the nurse explained gently. "Are your parents coming?" Amara shook her head, tears finally breaking free. "It's just me and Grandma. Please, I need to see her." Something in her desperation must have moved the nurse, who bent rules to allow Amara a brief 5-minute visit. Essie lay pale against the white hospital sheets, an IV in her arm, and monitors beeping steadily beside her. She managed a weak smile when Amara entered. "Did you show them, Sunshine?" she whispered. Amara nodded, holding her grandmother's hand carefully around the medical tape and tubes. "I got in, Grandma. They're giving us housing and food during the competition." Relief softened Essie's tired features. "I knew you would." They spent the precious minutes discussing the arrangements, both pretending that Essie would be well enough to join Amara soon, though the reality of her condition hung heavy in the room. When the nurse returned to end the visit, Amara left with promises to return in the morning. Outside the hospital, the full weight of her situation descended. With her grandmother hospitalized and their car inaccessible in the hospital parking lot, Amara had nowhere to go. Too proud to tell hospital staff she was homeless, she eventually curled up on a bench in a small park across from the hospital, her advancement papers tucked safely inside her jacket, hunger and worry keeping sleep at bay, as she watched the lights of the hospital where her grandmother fought for her life, the taste of her momentary victory now bitter in her mouth. The following morning, after checking on her grandmother whose condition had stabilized but still required hospitalization, Amara made her way to the downtown hotel where contestant housing had been arranged. The gleaming high-rise, with its revolving doors and uniformed doormen, was more intimidating than the hospital had been, and Amara hesitated before approaching the special check-in desk set up in the lobby with American spotlight banners. The receptionist, a young white woman with a perpetual customer service smile, didn't bother to hide her surprise when Amara presented her contestant credentials. "There must be some mistake," she said, checking her tablet with furrowed brows. "Contestants are supposed to have guardians with them." Amara explained about her grandmother's hospitalization, producing both her advancement papers and the hospital admission forms as proof. The receptionist made several phone calls, speaking in hushed tones while occasionally glancing at Amara with expressions ranging from annoyance to pity. Finally, she sighed dramatically. "Fine. You're in room 812. One of the economy rooms." She handed over a key card with obvious reluctance. "But if your guardian doesn't show up within 48 hours, we'll have to contact child services." The implied threat hung in the air as Amara took the key card, understanding all too well what that would mean: potential separation from her grandmother, foster care, and the end of her chance at the competition. As she headed toward the elevators, she overheard the receptionist muttering to a colleague, "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel this season." The economy room turned out to be significantly smaller than the other contestant accommodations, located near the service elevators with a view of the ventilation equipment rather than the city skyline. More concerning, the bathroom had a persistent leak that had created water damage on one wall, and the heating system emitted a concerning rattle. But to Amara, who had been sleeping in a car, it was still luxury: a real bed, running water, and most importantly, safety. After washing up and changing into the one other outfit she had brought in her backpack, Amara headed to the contestant orientation meeting scheduled for that afternoon. The hotel ballroom was filled with the 32 contestants who had advanced from the preliminary auditions, along with their families, coaches, and various support personnel. Amara entered alone, immediately feeling the stark contrast between herself and the other competitors who arrived in groups with professional-looking portfolios and equipment. A production assistant directed her to a table where she was assigned a roommate standard practice for contestants to save on accommodation costs. "You'll be sharing with Zoe Washington in room 812, the assistant explained, checking her clipboard. Before Amara could respond, a tall girl with straightened brown hair and designer clothes approached, followed by what appeared to be her parents. "Excuse me," the mother interjected, having overheard. "There must be some mistake. Zoe was promised a private room due to her practice requirements." The assistant looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Washington, but all contestants are paired this season. Network directive to create more interpersonal dynamics for the show." Zoe looked Amara up and down with poorly concealed disdain. "Mom, can we talk to the producers? This isn't going to work with my schedule." The implication that Amara was somehow unacceptable as a roommate was clear, and several nearby contestants exchanged uncomfortable glances. The orientation continued with Amara sitting alone while other contestants clustered in groups, the social dynamics of the competition already establishing themselves before the first official performance. After the general briefing, contestants were assigned to vocal coaches for preliminary assessment sessions. Amara was directed to Rebecca Thompson, a middle-aged white woman with impeccable credentials and a reputation for transforming good singers into great ones. The initial session, however, was disastrous from the start. "Your technique is completely undeveloped," Rebecca declared within minutes of hearing Amara sing scales. "Who has been teaching you? Your diction needs complete overhaul, and your breathing is all wrong." When Amara explained she'd learned primarily in church choir without formal training, Rebecca sighed dramatically. This is what happens when they let people in based on stories rather than readiness. "I don't have time to teach fundamentals at this stage of the competition." The session ended abruptly when Rebecca claimed she needed to prepare for her serious contestants, leaving Amara alone in the practice room, fighting back tears of humiliation. As she left, Luis Morales, an assistant producer who had been observing various coaching sessions, approached her in the hallway. "Don't take it personally," he said kindly. "Rebecca does this every season to at least one contestant she doesn't think fits her image of a winner." Luis, a 30-year-old Latino man who had worked his way up from production assistant over 7 seasons, had seen enough behind-the-scenes manipulation to recognize when a contestant was being set up to fail. "Look, I can help you practice if you want. I was a vocal performance major before I got into production." Amara looked at him suspiciously, unsure why anyone would offer help. "Why would you do that?" Luis shrugged. "Let's just say I believe in fairness, and what's happening to you isn't fair. This unexpected alliance became crucial as the days progressed. Amara discovered that several other black contestants had been eliminated in the preliminary rounds despite performances that observers considered superior to white contestants who advanced. In the dining hall where contestants gathered for meals, Amara often sat alone, occasionally overhearing conversations from production staff. During one such meal, she heard Cameron Wallace speaking to another producer at a nearby table. "The homeless black girl is perfect poverty porn," he said between bites of his expensive-looking lunch. "Viewers eat that sob story crap up, then feel good about themselves for watching. We'll milk it for 3 episodes max, then orchestrate her elimination before the serious competition begins." The casual cruelty of the statement stole Amara's appetite, though food had become precious to her after weeks of near starvation. She slipped a roll into her pocket for later, a habit formed from uncertainty about when her next meal would come. The wardrobe department similarly reinforced the disparity in treatment. While other contestants were provided with multiple designer outfits for performances and promotional materials, Amara was given a collection of ill-fitting second-hand clothes that the wardrobe director claimed would maintain her authentic look. When she requested something that fit properly for her first performance, she was told the budget didn't allow for custom sizing for every contestant. Luis became increasingly concerned as he observed the systematic disadvantages being placed in Amara's path. He broke protocol by helping her visit her grandmother in the hospital between rehearsals, knowing that contestants were generally not allowed to leave the hotel without production approval. "They do this every season," he confided during one such hospital trip. "Find 1 or 2 contestants of color who are incredibly talented, promote them in the advertising to show diversity, then create conditions that make it nearly impossible for them to advance." Amara's grandmother was improving slowly, the hospital providing the consistent medical care she had been unable to access while homeless. During these visits, Essie would listen to Amara practice, offering encouragement and the emotional support the competition environment sorely lacked. "Remember, Sunshine," she said during one visit, "your voice comes from generations before you. When you sing, you're not alone." The competition's manipulation became even more apparent when Amara accidentally discovered her viral registration video being mocked during a production meeting she wasn't meant to witness. Patricia's recording of Amara asking, "If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" had become an inside joke among staff, with various executives and producers doing impressions of her desperate request. Standing frozen outside the conference room door, Amara heard Cameron laughing. "Can you believe this kid? Will you give me a plate of food?" Like we're running a soup kitchen instead of a multi-million-dollar production. The laughter that followed cut deeper than any direct insult could have. Later that evening, a camera operator named Maya Chen found Amara crying in an empty practice room. Unlike many staff members who maintain professional distance, Maya sat down beside her. "I've worked 3 seasons on this show," she said quietly, "and I've seen how they manipulate certain contestants. What they're doing to you isn't right." She hesitated before adding, "I've been documenting it. The different treatment, the comments, the sabotage. Just in case someone ever has the courage to speak up." Maya showed Amara a flash drive where she'd been saving footage that never made it to air clips of Bradley's racist comments, producers discussing how to undermine certain contestants, and the stark differences in resources allocated to contestants based on race and background. "I could lose my job for this," Maya admitted. "But some things matter more than a paycheck." That night, as Amara lay awake in her room, Zoe had successfully requested reassignment, claiming Amara's irregular schedule disrupted her sleep. She seriously considered quitting. The systematic obstacles, the humiliation, the isolation, all of it seemed designed to break her spirit. But thoughts of her grandmother in the hospital, relying on medical care they couldn't otherwise afford, strengthened her resolve. The competition's meal plan and housing had become a lifeline, not just for Amara, but for Essie as well. Quitting wasn't an option. As she finally drifted to sleep, Amara decided that no matter what they threw at her, she would persevere not just for the chance at the grand prize, but for the daily bread that kept her and her grandmother alive. She would sing, and sing brilliantly, forcing them to acknowledge her talent even as they tried to diminish it. It was, she realized, no longer just about a plate of food, but about demanding the respect and opportunity systematically denied to people who looked like her. The first live performance week arrived with a theme announcement: Songs That Inspire. Contestants were given 3 days to select, arrange, and rehearse their pieces with the help of the show's musical directors and their assigned vocal coaches. When Amara announced her choice, Sam Cooke's civil rights anthem, "A Change Is Gonna Come," the reaction was immediate and revealing. Bradley Harrison interrupted her rehearsal, something he rarely did with other contestants. "That's too political," he stated flatly, arms crossed as he watched her practice with the reluctant assistance of Rebecca Thompson. "Pick something less confrontational. This is a family show, not a protest rally." Amara stood her ground, a newfound confidence emerging from the adversity she'd faced. "The theme is Songs That Inspire, and this song inspires me. There's nothing in the rules against it." Bradley's expression darkened. "Listen, kid, I'm trying to help you. America votes on these performances, and certain songs don't play well with our core demographic." The implication was crystal clear. Luis, who was present for the exchange, stepped forward. "Actually, the song choice was approved by the music department yesterday. It's already been arranged for the orchestra." This wasn't entirely true. Luis had expedited the arrangement specifically to prevent this type of interference, but it created enough official-sounding cover that Bradley backed down, though not without a parting shot. "Your funeral, kid. Don't come crying when America sends you packing." The performance schedule placed Amara in the last slot of the evening, typically when viewership began to drop off as the show ran late. The positioning was another subtle disadvantage, as was the accidental skipping of her scheduled sound check earlier that day. On the morning of the live show, more obstacles appeared. The makeup artist assigned to Amara claimed to be not trained for her hair texture and left it untouched, forcing Maya to step in during her break and help style it appropriately. "They do this deliberately," Maya whispered, as she worked quickly with the products she'd brought from her own personal supplies. "Create conditions where you can't possibly look as polished as the other contestants, then judge you for not measuring up to their standard." By the time Amara was called to the stage for her performance, she had endured a day of systematic disadvantages designed to undermine her confidence. Standing in the wings, watching the favorable lighting and camera angles given to other performers, particularly Zoe Washington, who received a glowing introduction from Bradley, Amara felt a mixture of anger and determination crystallizing inside her. The stage manager finally cued her entrance with a disinterested wave, and Amara walked out to polite but tepid applause, the audience tired after nearly 2 hours of performances. Bradley's introduction was perfunctory. "Our final performer tonight is 11-year-old Amara Johnson from Detroit, singing 'A Change Is Gonna Come.' No mention of her extraordinary preliminary audition, no humanizing details, as had been provided for other contestants, just the bare minimum required by the script. Amara took her position center stage, the single spotlight feeling more like an interrogation lamp than the warm glow that had bathed previous performers. The orchestra began the iconic opening notes, and Amara took a deep breath, channeling every emotion of the past months into her performance. Halfway through the first verse, disaster struck her microphone cut out completely, her voice suddenly inaudible beyond the first few rows of the audience. There was confusion as technicians scrambled, producers shouted into headsets, and the orchestra continued playing, unaware of the issue. In that critical moment, Amara made a decision that would define her journey. Instead of stopping or panicking, she continued singing, projecting her voice with every ounce of power she possessed, unamplified in the massive auditorium. The raw, unprocessed quality of her voice carried an authenticity that technology couldn't capture, growing in strength until it reached even the back rows. The audience, initially confused, fell into a stunned silence as they witnessed this child performing with a passion and technical perfection that transcended the technical failure. By the time she reached the emotional crescendo of the song, people were standing, some with tears streaming down their faces, others recording on their phones, as Amara delivered each note with flawless control and devastating emotional impact. The final lines. "It's been a long time coming. but I know a change gonna come resonated through the auditorium without electronic assistance, a testament to both her vocal power and the song's enduring message. When she finished, the silence held for 3 heartbeats before the audience erupted in the most thunderous standing ovation of the evening. Even the orchestra members were on their feet, instruments temporarily forgotten. Cameron rushed to the stage, attempting damage control. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the technical difficulties. Amara will be given an opportunity to repeat her performance once we resolve the microphone issue." From the audience, a shout rose. "No need!" We heard every perfect note. This sparked a wave of agreement from the crowd. Richard Townsend, breaking protocol, stood from the judges' table. "I think we all agree that was one of the most remarkable performances in this competition's history, technical difficulties notwithstanding." Bradley looked furious, but was trapped by the audience's overwhelming response. When the judges were finally able to deliver their feedback, Veronica spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "Amara, what you just did shouldn't be possible. To project with that control, that emotional precision, in a venue this size without amplification. I've seen professional opera singers who couldn't accomplish what you just did." Richard nodded in agreement. "In my 50 years in this industry, I've never witnessed such poise under pressure, especially from someone so young. You didn't just overcome a technical failure, you transformed it into one of the most authentic moments this show has ever seen." Bradley, however, was determined to diminish the achievement. "Let's not get carried away with the sympathy vote here," he said, ignoring the boos that immediately erupted from the audience. "Yes, the microphone issue was unfortunate, but the performance itself was derivative. You're clearly relying on emotional manipulation rather than technical merit. This competition isn't about who has the saddest story, it's about who has the best voice." Veronica turned to him, live on air, with barely contained fury. "Are you seriously suggesting that what we just witnessed was anything less than extraordinary? This child just delivered a master class in vocal control under the worst possible circumstances, and you're accusing her of emotional manipulation? Take a look in the mirror, Bradley." The tension between the judges became the secondary story of the evening, overshadowed only by Amara's remarkable performance. Social media exploded during and after the broadcast, with hashtags #FeedAmara and #AmericaSpotlightRacism trending simultaneously. Clips of the microphone failure and Amara's subsequent unassisted performance went viral within hours, along with side-by-side comparisons of the production quality differences between her performance and those of white contestants. The racial justice implications were impossible to ignore, especially when paired with leaked fragments of Bradley's affirmative action comment from the auditions. Back in the contestants' lounge after the show, reactions were mixed. Some competitors approached Amara with genuine admiration, while others, including Zoe, maintained their distance, clearly threatened by the audience's overwhelming response to her performance. Luis rushed in with news. "The voting is through the roof." They've never seen numbers like this for an opening week. Yet when the results were announced the following night, Amara placed 6th out of 12, advancing contestants, a position that kept her in the competition but seemed suspiciously disconnected from the audience reaction witnessed the previous evening. Cameron Wallace was overheard by Maya telling a network executive, "We had to adjust the algorithm slightly. Can't have the charity case winning in week 1, there's no story arc in that." That evening, a surprising development occurred. An anonymous donor had arranged for food baskets to be delivered to homeless shelters throughout Detroit in Amara's name, inspired by her original request for a plate of food. The gesture received media coverage that the show's publicity team scrambled to capitalize on, despite having nothing to do with the donation. When Amara returned to her room that night, exhausted but proud of her performance, she found the door ajar. Inside, her few possessions had been scattered across the floor, her competition materials torn, and a note left on the pillow. "Charity cases don't belong here. Go back to the streets where you belong." She reported the vandalism to hotel security, but with no cameras in the residential hallways and no witnesses, there was little they could do beyond filing a report. As Amara gathered her belongings, carefully taping together her sheet music and competition schedule, She realized that her success had transformed her from a dismissible nuisance to an active threat in the eyes of those who had never intended for someone like her to advance. The sabotage, rather than discouraging her, only strengthened her resolve. If they were resorting to intimidation, it meant her talent had become undeniable, and that was a power they couldn't easily take away. In the days following her first live performance, Amara experienced a strange new phenomenon: media attention. The microphone miracle, as it was being called online, had catapulted her from obscure contestant to national talking point. Major news outlets picked up the story, though most focused on the heartwarming homeless angle rather than the competition's documented pattern of disadvantaging contestants of color. "America's Hungry Songbird," read one headline. "Homeless girl sings for supper on national TV," declared another. Few mentioned the technical failure that many viewers now suspected had been deliberate, or the disparities in production quality that Maya's unauthorized footage had begun to reveal through anonymous social media accounts. The conservative media landscape took a predictably different approach. Jackson Wells, a prominent right-wing commentator, dedicated a 10-minute segment of his show to criticizing Amara. "What we're seeing here is another example of playing the race card to advance in a competition. This girl's story is sad, sure, but are we really supposed to believe that every inconvenience she faces is because of racism rather than her lack of preparation for a professional competition?" His viewers flooded the show's voting system with negative feedback, creating a political dimension to what should have been a talent-based competition. The American Spotlight publicity team, recognizing the ratings potential of the controversy, scheduled Amara for a series of promotional interviews. Heather Davis, the head of publicity, personally briefed her beforehand. "Focus on your gratitude for the opportunity," she instructed, handing Amara a sheet of talking points. "Mention how the show has changed your life by providing meals and housing. Avoid any mention of technical difficulties or unfair treatment. We're going with the inspirational angle, not the controversy angle." When Amara reviewed the talking points, she noticed they positioned her as a charity case rather than a legitimate competitor. "Why can't I talk about my singing?" she asked. "That's what the competition is supposed to be about." Heather's smile tightened. "Audiences connect with stories, Amara. Your singing is wonderful, but it's your journey that will keep people voting." During her first interview with a morning show host, Amara initially followed the script, expressing gratitude for the opportunity. But when the host asked patronizingly if she was just happy to have regular meals now, something shifted in her expression. "I'm grateful for the basic necessities that every child should have access to," she replied carefully. "But I entered this competition because I believe in my talent, not just to get food. I'd like to be judged on my voice, not my circumstances." The publicist standing off camera looked horrified, making slashing motions across her throat, but Amara continued. "There are many talented kids who never get opportunities because of their race or economic situation. I'm singing for them too." The unscripted moment went viral, with supporters praising her dignity while detractors accused her of being ungrateful and playing the victim card. Back at the hotel, Amara received unexpected news. Her grandmother's condition had stabilized enough for discharge, though she would require ongoing treatment for her diabetes. More surprisingly, her hospital bills had been paid by an anonymous donor. "Must be another one of those publicity stunts," Cameron commented when the news reached the production team. "Great for our narrative, though. We'll get the grandmother on camera for next week's family segment." Essie moved into Amara's hotel room, the competition reluctantly accommodating the arrangement after Luis pointed out the potential PR disaster of separating a critically ill woman from her only family. Having her grandmother present provided Amara with emotional support she desperately needed, but also created new challenges, as Essie witnessed firsthand the disparities in treatment that her granddaughter had been facing. "This isn't right," Essie murmured, after watching Rebecca Thompson spend 5 minutes on Amara's vocal coaching before claiming she had another appointment, while Zoe's session the same day lasted over an hour. "This is how the world works, Grandma," Amara replied with a wisdom beyond her years. "But I'm still going to sing my heart out." As week 2 of the competition approached, a new development emerged. Elizabeth Windsor, A wealthy patron of the arts, with connections to the network, offered Amara private mentorship outside the official competition structure. This could be a wonderful opportunity, Heather emphasized when presenting the offer. Miss Windsor has helped launch several significant careers. Something about the arrangement felt wrong to Amara, prompting her to ask Luis for his perspective. His research revealed concerning patterns. Elizabeth has a history of discovering young black performers, using them for publicity, then dropping them once they're no longer useful to her image as a progressive philanthropist, he explained, showing Amara articles about previous protégés who had briefly shined under Windsor's patronage before disappearing into obscurity. She calls it mentorship, but it looks more like exploitation. Amara declined the offer, much to the production team's annoyance. "You're not in a position to turn down opportunities," Cameron scolded. "Do you have any idea how many contestants would kill for Windsor's attention?" What Cameron didn't know was that Amara had begun receiving messages from previous black contestants who had experienced similar treatment on the show. Through an encrypted messaging app provided by Maya, former participants shared their stories: promises broken, opportunities sabotaged, and systematic disadvantages, designed to prevent advancement beyond a certain point in the competition. "They keep one or two of us around for diversity in the promotional materials," wrote a contestant from 3 seasons prior. "But they never intend for us to win." The furthest any black contestant has made it in 15 seasons is 5th place, and that was with massive social media pressure. This historical context helped Amara understand that what she was experiencing wasn't unique or accidental, but part of a deliberate pattern. Meanwhile, online activists had begun compiling a documentary record of Bradley Harrison's history of racist comments, both on and off the show. The evidence was damning years of thinly veiled bigotry disguised as honest criticism, with black and brown contestants consistently receiving harsher evaluations for performances comparable to their white counterparts. Network executives, alarmed by the growing controversy, pressured producers to control the narrative. "This needs to be about her inspiring story of overcoming homelessness, not about race," one executive demanded during an emergency meeting. "We're getting complaints from advertisers who don't want to be associated with accusations of racism." As tensions mounted behind the scenes, Amara made a discovery that confirmed her suspicions about the competition's systematic bias. While practicing late one night in what she thought was an empty rehearsal room, she found a journal hidden behind a piece of sound equipment. The notebook belonged to a contestant from the previous season, a 16-year-old Latino singer who had documented his experiences before being eliminated in week 4. The entries detailed similar patterns of discrimination, unequal resources, sabotaged performances, and manipulated voting results. "They never intended for people like us to win," one entry read. "We're just here to make them look diverse in the promotional materials." The journal's final entry was particularly disturbing. "Tomorrow is elimination night. Cameron told me off. Record that I'm going home regardless of the votes. Said there was an audience demographic to consider. At least I got to perform on national TV. Maybe someone will notice me." Amara showed the journal to Veronica after her next coaching session. The judge appeared genuinely disturbed, but not entirely surprised. "I've suspected things like this for several seasons," she admitted, carefully examining the entries. "But suspecting and proving are different things. The contracts we all sign have powerful non-disclosure provisions." She studied Amara thoughtfully. "They underestimated you. They expected a grateful, compliant charity case, not someone who would challenge the system." Before leaving, Veronica offered a warning. "Be careful, Amara. The further you advance, the more desperate they'll become to control or eliminate you. You're challenging a narrative they've carefully constructed over 15 seasons." The warning proved prophetic. That evening, as Amara returned to her room, she encountered Bradley in an otherwise empty corridor. "You're making waves, kid," he said, his tone conversational, but his eyes cold. "Not smart for someone in your position." When Amara didn't respond, he continued, "This competition has launched careers, but it's also broken them. Think about your grandmother. Wouldn't it be a shame if her medical coverage was suddenly questioned by the network?" The threat was unmistakable. Amara looked him directly in the eyes. "Are you threatening my grandmother because I'm singing too well?" Bradley laughed, a sound without humor. "I'm giving you friendly advice. This is a business, not a charity or a social justice campaign. Know your place, play your part, and everyone benefits. Push too hard and, well," he shrugged before walking away, "things break." The encounter left Amara shaken but more determined than ever. That night, she discussed her options with Luis and Maya, who had become her trusted allies in the increasingly hostile environment. "They're getting scared," Luis observed. "Your talent is undeniable, and the audience is connecting with you despite their efforts to control the narrative. You're becoming a threat to their entire system." Maya nodded in agreement. "I've worked here 3 seasons, and I've never seen them this rattled by a contestant. You're exposing contradictions they've successfully hidden for years." As they strategized, Maya received a text from a colleague in the production booth. "You need to see this," she said, showing them her phone. The message contained a video clip from a production meeting where Cameron was discussing Amara with other executives. "We need to start planning for containment," he was saying. "If the voting trends continue, she could make the Final Four, which is not in our interest. We have the morality clause in her contract if needed. Plenty of homeless kids have issues we can exploit. Start digging deeper into her background." The 3 looked at each other in silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were not just fighting for fair treatment in a talent competition, they were challenging an entire system designed to maintain specific power dynamics while creating the illusion of meritocracy. "So, what do we do?" Amara finally asked, her young voice steady despite everything. "They have all the power." Luis thought for a moment before responding. "Not all of it. They need viewers, sponsors, and public goodwill. And right now, you have something they didn't expect." "What's that?" "A voice they can't silence," Maya said simply, "both literally and figuratively. They can manipulate a lot, but they can't make you stop singing. And every time you do, people listen not just to the notes, but to the truth behind them." As Amara prepared for the semifinals, this understanding became her strength. They could control the production, the narrative, and even the voting to some extent, but they couldn't control her voice or what she chose to do with it. In that realization, she found not just determination, but a deeper purpose that transcended the competition itself. She was no longer singing just for a plate of food or even for the grand prize, but for every voice that had been systematically silenced by systems claiming to celebrate merit while reinforcing privilege. Her grandmother, watching her practice with fierce concentration, recognized the transformation. "You're not just singing anymore, Sunshine," she observed. "You're testifying." The semifinals theme was announced with typical fanfare, "Songs of Your Heritage." For many contestants, this prompted predictable choices: European classical pieces, traditional folk songs from family countries of origin, or popularized versions of cultural standards. For Amara, however, the theme offered an opportunity to connect her personal struggle with a deeper historical context. After careful consideration and consultation with Veronica, who had become an increasingly active mentor despite production's attempts to limit their interaction, Amara chose the spiritual Wade in the Water. The song's dual, meaning both religious imagery and coded instructions for escaped slaves, using waterways to elude, capture, resonated with her growing understanding of how systems of power operated in plain sight while maintaining plausible deniability. When she announced her selection during the weekly planning meeting, Bradley's reaction was predictable. "Something more mainstream and less ethnic would serve you better," he suggested, the last word carrying a slight emphasis that made several staff members glance away uncomfortably. "Perhaps a Motown selection? That's heritage too, and more accessible to our audience." Amara maintained her composure. "With respect, sir, this song represents both my spiritual heritage and historical experience. The rules state we choose songs reflecting our heritage, not the audience's preferences." The rehearsal period brought new obstacles. Amara consistently found her scheduled rehearsal space accidentally double-booked or mysteriously unavailable. Technical support that was readily provided to other contestants became suddenly limited when she required assistance. The official vocal coach continued to provide minimal guidance, spending more time on her phone than actually working with Amara. These challenges might have been insurmountable if not for an unexpected development. Dr. James Thompson, a renowned vocal coach and Veronica's former mentor, arrived unannounced at the hotel and offered Amara private coaching sessions. "Veronica called me," he explained during their first meeting. "Said there was a voice I needed to hear before I retired." She wasn't exaggerating. Dr. Thompson, a 72-year-old black man who had trained some of the industry's most successful vocalists, brought decades of experience and an understanding of the industry's racial dynamics that proved invaluable. "What you're experiencing isn't new," he told Amara during one session. "They've just gotten more sophisticated about disguising it. In my day, they'd simply tell us we weren't welcome. Now they smile while creating conditions designed to make you fail, then blame the failure on you." Under his guidance, Amara's already remarkable voice gained new technical precision and emotional depth. She learned breathing techniques that would allow her to maintain control even under adverse conditions, a skill that would prove crucial given the production team's history of technical difficulties during her performances. The social dynamics among contestants had also evolved. Most continued to maintain distance from Amara, fearful of association with the competition's most controversial participant. However, one contestant, Rachel Chen, a 16-year-old Chinese-American classical vocalist from California, broke ranks and openly befriended her. "They're doing the same thing to me, just more subtly," Rachel confided during a rare moment when they were alone. "My mic is always set slightly lower than other contestants. My lighting is always a bit dimmer. The judges question my song choices as too ethnic, even when I'm singing European classical repertoire." Rachel also provided critical information about the competition contract. "There's a clause they can use to eliminate contestants for moral character reasons," she explained, showing Amara the relevant section in the lengthy agreement. "It's vague enough that they could apply it to almost anything. They used it last season to eliminate a Latino contestant after someone anonymously reported seeing him at a political protest." The semifinals arrived with tension at an unprecedented level. Both online and in-person supporters had begun wearing blue ribbons, the color of Amara's first performance dress, as a symbol of solidarity, and the hashtag number #LetAmaraSing was trending nationally. Network executives were divided on how to handle the situation, some arguing for embracing the controversy for ratings, while others feared sponsor backlash. The day of the semifinal performance brought more sabotage attempts. Amara discovered her costume had been damaged, the beading along one shoulder deliberately cut so it would potentially fall apart during her performance. Her sheet music went mysteriously missing from the rehearsal room where she had left it. Even her microphone pack malfunctioned during the final sound check, requiring a last-minute replacement. Through each challenge, Amara maintained a composure that belied her 11 years, addressing each problem methodically with the help of her small but dedicated support network. As she waited backstage, she could hear Bradley's voice carrying from the judges' platform where he sat with Richard and Veronica, unaware his microphone was partially active during the commercial break. "Waste of a finalist spot," he was saying. "But the diversity optics are good for the network, I suppose. Just make sure the voting system has the appropriate adjustments." Veronica's reply was inaudible, but her expression, visible on the backstage monitor, was thunderous. When Amara's name was finally announced, she walked onto the stage with a quiet dignity that immediately commanded attention. The audience, larger than previous weeks due to the growing controversy, erupted in supportive applause before she had sung a single note. Bradley was visibly annoyed, tapping his pen impatiently until the applause subsided. The house lights dimmed, and Amara stood in silence for a moment, centering herself as Dr. Thompson had taught her. When the first notes of Wade in the Water began, she closed her eyes briefly before beginning to sing. What followed was not merely a performance, but a channeling of history and emotion that transcended the competition format. Amara's voice carried centuries of struggle and resilience, each phrase connecting her personal journey to the larger story of a people who had used music as both solace and resistance. The controlled power of her lower register gave way to soaring high notes that filled the auditorium without a hint of strain, demonstrating a technical mastery that even the most accomplished adult vocalists would envy. But it was the emotional authenticity, the lived understanding of what it meant to wade in the water when the path forward was treacherous, that rendered the audience completely silent, collectively holding their breath as the final notes resonated. The silence that followed her final note lasted several heartbeats before the audience erupted in the most thunderous standing ovation of the season. Even Bradley seemed momentarily affected before his expression hardened back into professional skepticism. As the applause finally subsided, Richard spoke first. "In 50 years of judging vocal performances, I have rarely encountered such a perfect marriage of technical excellence and emotional truth. You didn't just perform that song, Amara. You embodied its deepest meaning." Veronica nodded in agreement. What we just witnessed transcended entertainment. That was art in its purest form, truth, expressed through perfect technique. When the microphone passed to Bradley, his expression was unreadable. He studied his notes for a moment before looking up. While the technical elements were certainly competent, he began, his voice carrying a dismissive undertone that immediately shifted the energy in the room. "I question whether this competition is the appropriate venue for such racially charged performances. We're here to entertain, not deliver history lessons or political statements." The audience reaction was immediate boos and calls of protest erupting from multiple sections. Bradley raised his voice to be heard over the growing noise. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, emotional manipulation rather than objective evaluation of talent." The constant playing of the race, his sentence was cut short as someone in the production booth finally cut his microphone, but not before the partial slur had been broadcast to millions of viewers. The camera caught his mouth continuing to move before he realized he'd been silenced, his face reddening with anger. Veronica stood from her chair and physically stepped between Bradley and the camera, addressing the audience directly. "We appear to be experiencing technical difficulties," she said smoothly, though the steel in her voice was unmistakable. "Let's take a commercial break." As producers rushed the stage, confusion reigned. The live broadcast cut abruptly to commercials, but not before cameras captured Bradley angrily confronting a technician while Veronica positioned herself protectively near Amara. In the control room, frantic discussions erupted about how to handle the situation for the West Coast broadcast, which would air 3 hours later. The network ultimately decided to edit Bradley's comment, replacing it with a more sanitized critique from an earlier rehearsal, but the damage was done. Dozens of audience members had recorded the original moment on their phones, and the unedited clip spread virally across social media platforms within minutes. Number America Spotlight Number Exposed Racism began trending nationally, followed quickly by Number Fire Bradley. The network issued a hasty statement announcing Bradley's suspension pending investigation, though notably not his removal. The statement characterized his comment as an unfortunate choice of words, rather than addressing its racial implications directly. This half-measure only fueled further controversy, particularly when contrasted with the immediate termination of a black production assistant the previous season for a much more minor infraction. Behind the scenes, Veronica issued an ultimatum to network executives: either remove Bradley permanently or she would quit publicly, explaining exactly why. "This isn't an isolated incident," she told the network president in a closed-door meeting. "It's the visible tip of a systematic problem that I've been documenting for 3 seasons." While this crisis unfolded, Maya was quietly distributing her most damning evidence to trusted journalists, emails from Cameron explicitly discussing the plan to exploit Amara's story for ratings while ensuring she would be eliminated before the finals. The emails included disturbing language about using the homeless angle while making sure the demographic balance of the finals remains consistent with viewer preferences, a thinly veiled reference to maintaining white dominance in the competition's final rounds. By morning, the controversy had expanded beyond Bradley's comment to encompass the competition's entire history of racial bias. The network announced a press conference to address the situation, scheduled for the following day. That night, As Amara tried to process everything that had happened, her grandmother held her close. "You did exactly what you needed to do, Sunshine," Essie said softly. "You sang your truth, and now they can't unhear it. Whatever happens next, remember that your voice has already changed things. That's a victory they can never take away." The network's hastily organized press conference did little to contain the growing controversy. A panel of executives announced an internal investigation into Bradley's comment, while emphasizing Amara would remain in the competition. The carefully worded statement avoided addressing the documented pattern of discrimination, instead focusing on a single regrettable incident that they characterized as not reflective of our values. Social media response was immediate and largely negative, with many pointing out that an internal investigation by the very system being accused of bias was inherently compromised. What the executives hadn't anticipated was the rapid escalation beyond just media criticism. Death threats began arriving at the hotel targeting Amara, most containing explicitly racial language. Security protocols were hastily implemented, and Amara and her grandmother were relocated to a different hotel under assumed names. The competition's public relations team attempted to control the narrative by emphasizing security concerns rather than addressing the racial hatred driving the threats. "We take the safety of all contestants seriously," their statement read, without specifically condemning the racist nature of the threats. As mainstream media finally began seriously covering the discrimination angle, high-profile black artists started speaking out in support of Amara. Grammy-winning musicians, influential producers, and entertainment industry executives released statements condemning both Bradley's comment and the competition's history of bias. The pressure intensified when Victoria Banks, CEO of one of the industry's most successful independent labels, publicly offered Amara a recording contract regardless of the competition's outcome. "Talent like hers transcends these outdated competition formats," Banks stated in a widely shared video. "American Spotlight has overlooked exceptional black artists for 15 seasons. We won't make the same mistake." The network's internal investigation quickly revealed what many had long suspected. American Spotlight had a documented history of discrimination against minorities in all aspects of production, from resource allocation to voting system design. Email records showed explicit discussions about maintaining a demographically appropriate winners' circle to avoid alienating the show's core audience, a thinly veiled reference to keeping the competition's most prestigious placements predominantly white. As these revelations emerged, Bradley attempted damage control with an appearance on a national morning show. His apology was a masterclass in deflection. "My words were taken out of context during a high-pressure live broadcast situation. Anyone who knows me understands I don't have a prejudiced bone in my body. I've mentored artists of all backgrounds throughout my career." The interview, intended to rehabilitate his image, instead further inflamed tensions when he suggested that Amara was being used by activists with political agendas rather than simply being a talented child deserving fair treatment. While public attention focused on Bradley, more insidious forces were at work behind the scenes. Amara's school records were mysteriously leaked to tabloid press, highlighting minor disciplinary incidents that were presented without context to suggest behavioral problems. What the tabloids failed to mention was that these incidents occurred during the period when Amara and her grandmother first became homeless, a traumatic transition for any child. Back in Detroit, something unexpected was happening. The community that had largely been unaware of Amara and Essie's homelessness before the competition began organizing. Local businesses, churches, and community organizations joined forces for a benefit concert supporting homeless youth, with proceeds designated for a new program providing stable housing and artistic development opportunities for talented children in precarious living situations. The initiative, named A Plate of Food and So Much More, in reference to Amara's original request, quickly gained corporate sponsors and municipal support. Within the competition, the fallout continued. Luis was terminated for breach of confidentiality after refusing to sign a statement supporting the network's version of events. He was forced to sign an aggressive non-disclosure agreement under threat of legal action that would have bankrupted him. "They can stop me from talking," he told Amara during a brief, unauthorized meeting before his departure, "but they can't stop what's already in motion." Rachel experienced significant backlash from other contestants for her continued friendship with Amara. "They're acting like I'm betraying the show by simply treating you like a human being," she confided during a rare moment when they could speak privately. "The pressure to conform is intense." Dr. Thompson, whose reputation was too substantial for the show to target directly, began analyzing voting patterns from previous seasons, identifying statistical anomalies that strongly suggested manipulation based on racial demographics. His preliminary findings, shared with trusted colleagues in academia, indicated that Black and brown contestants consistently received 20–30% fewer votes than white contestants delivering comparable performances. Meanwhile, Cameron grew increasingly desperate as his position became precarious. He confronted Amara directly after a rehearsal, cornering her in an empty corridor. "No one will believe a homeless black girl over us," he hissed, his usually carefully maintained facade cracking under pressure. "We built this show. We control the narrative. This little crusade of yours will be forgotten in a week, but your career will be over before it starts." What Cameron didn't know was that Maya had anticipated such a confrontation and had hidden a recording device nearby, capturing his threats in their entirety. As the situation intensified, Amara's grandmother suffered a health setback, the stress of the situation exacerbating her diabetes. Hospitalized again, Essie urged Amara to continue despite her concerns. "This isn't just about us anymore, Sunshine," she said from her hospital bed. "You've become something bigger than either of us expected. Those threats mean you're changing things they don't want changed." Amara considered withdrawing from the competition for safety reasons, but community leaders who had rallied around her cause urged persistence. "Staying in the fight is how change happens," Reverend Michael Johnson, no relation, told her during a supportive phone call. "Your voice is doing what generations of activism haven't fully accomplished, forcing them to confront their bias in front of millions of witnesses." The Reverend's church had been instrumental in organizing support in Detroit, transforming Amara from a local talent into a symbol of resistance against systemic inequality. This symbolic status brought both power and danger. Security around Amara was increased after authorities identified credible threats against her from white supremacist groups who viewed her as a threat to the racial status quo. Armed guards accompanied her to rehearsals, and all her movements were carefully planned and monitored. The competition, originally a simple chance at meals and opportunity, had transformed into something far more complex and consequential. Through it all, Amara continued to prepare for the finals with a focus and determination that impressed even her harshest critics. Dr. Pausad of Greidedat, Mara continued to prepare for the finals. Thompson's coaching sessions became a sanctuary from the chaos, a space where her only concern was the music itself. "They can control almost everything else," he reminded her, "but they cannot control what happens when you open your mouth to sing. That moment belongs solely to you." As finals week approached, Amara received a video call from her grandmother's hospital room. Essie's condition had stabilized, but remained serious, requiring extended treatment that would prevent her from attending the finals in person. "They expect you to fail," Essie told her granddaughter, her voice weak but her eyes fierce with determination. "Don't give them what they expect." These words became Amara's mantra as she entered the most challenging week of the competition. She was no longer singing just for food, or even for the grand prize that could transform her and her grandmother's lives. She was singing for every child whose talent had been dismissed because of their skin color or economic status, for every voice that had been systematically silenced by institutions claiming to celebrate merit while reinforcing privilege. The night before the finals, exhausted but resolute, Amara stood before a mirror in her hotel room, repeating her grandmother's daily affirmation, "You are brilliant, you are worthy, you are loved." For the first time since the competition began, she fully believed every word. The finals theme announced during the week leading up to the broadcast created new strategic challenges. Song that defines you. Each finalist would perform 3 songs, one chosen by the judges, one original composition or personally significant piece, and one demonstrating versatility. For Amara, this presented both opportunity and risk. The judge's selection, predictably, came with baggage. Bradley, despite his suspension, had input into the selections, and Amara was assigned What a Wonderful World, a beautiful but safe choice that Richard justified as showcasing her lower register, but that Cameron more candidly described in a production email as keeping her in an appropriately inspiring but non-confrontational lane. For her personal selection, Amara had been working secretly with Dr. Sarah Thompson on an original composition titled More Than a Plate, which directly addressed her journey from asking for food to demanding justice. The song's lyrics were carefully crafted to be simultaneously personal and universal, avoiding language that could be dismissed as overtly political while still communicating truth about systemic inequality. The third selection, meant to demonstrate versatility, was where Amara planned her boldest move. While officially rehearsing a classical crossover piece that had been approved by production, she was simultaneously preparing an alternate selection with Dr. Deschen's Thompson's guidance, a piece she would reveal only when live on stage, when it would be too late for intervention. The final preparations were intense and conducted under unprecedented security measures. After a credible threat against Amara was identified by law enforcement, the production implemented security protocols typically reserved for visiting dignitaries. Armed guards accompanied her between the hotel and rehearsal facilities, and all her food was prepared under supervision after concerns about potential tampering. While these measures protected her physically, the psychological weight was substantial for an 11-year-old already navigating extraordinary circumstances. The rehearsal process itself continued to reflect the competition's systemic bias, though now somewhat tempered by public scrutiny. The costume department had initially provided Amara with a budget significantly lower than other finalists, but after this disparity was highlighted on social media, designer Maria Rodriguez volunteered to create appropriate wardrobe on her own time, circumventing the official constraints. Similarly, technical resources that had previously been unavailable for Amara's rehearsals suddenly materialized as production staff, aware of the growing controversy, became reluctant to participate in obviously discriminatory practices that might later be attributed to them specifically. Rachel made a critical discovery during this period. While using a production computer to review her performance footage, she accidentally accessed files, showing how the voting system had been programmed to cap votes from certain geographic areas, predominantly urban centers with higher Black and Latino populations, while allowing unlimited participation from regions with predominantly white demographics. They've built the bias directly into the voting architecture, she explained to Amara, showing screenshots she'd hastily captured. It's sophisticated enough to maintain plausible deniability, while ensuring the outcomes align with their audience demographic preferences. Meanwhile, Maya had been meticulously documenting every instance of differential treatment, creating a comprehensive record that she provided to Veronica. This goes beyond Bradley's comment or any single incident, Maya explained during a clandestine meeting in Veronica's hotel suite. It's a pattern embedded in every aspect of production, from resource allocation to judging criteria to technical support. Veronica, who had been building her own case for 3 seasons, combined Maya's evidence with her documentation. This is enough to justify legal action, she noted grimly. Not just against individuals, but against the entire production and network. The night before the finals, crisis struck. Essie was rushed back to intensive care after a severe diabetic episode, her condition classified as critical. When Amara requested emergency leave to be with her grandmother, the competition administration denied the request, citing contractual obligations for the finals broadcast. We'll arrange for you to visit immediately after tomorrow's performance, Cameron offered with artificial sympathy. The show must go on. Dr. Thompson, witnessing Amara's distress, used his considerable influence to arrange an alternative, a secure video call between Amara and her grandmother during her final preparation period. The call was brief, as Essie's condition allowed only limited consciousness, but her words became Amara's armor. "Sing your truth," sunshine. Not just for us, but for everyone who needs to hear it. The morning of the finals arrived with unprecedented public interest. Tickets had sold out within minutes of release, and network executives were projecting record viewership. Social media was ablaze with discussion, the controversy having transcended entertainment news to become a national conversation about representation and opportunity. Outside the venue, supporters gathered with blue ribbons and signs, while a smaller contingent of Bradley defenders staged a counter-demonstration complaining about cancel culture and reverse discrimination. Inside, Amara prepared with focused determination, supported by her small but dedicated alliance. Rachel sacrificed her own preparation time to help Amara review her performance plan, while Dr. Thompson provided last-minute technical guidance. Remember, he told her as they worked through vocal exercises, no matter what happens out there, you've already won by forcing them to confront their own bias. Whatever comes next is just details. As the final rehearsal concluded, Amara felt a strange calm descend. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her throughout the competition were replaced by absolute clarity about what she needed to do. The path forward was dangerous and might cost her the victory by conventional measures, but it offered something more valuable: the opportunity to use her voice for true change. As Dr. Thompson had reminded her repeatedly, some victories aren't measured by trophies or contracts, but by the systems they transform. With that understanding firmly in mind, Amara prepared to deliver the performance of her young life, not just singing notes, but testifying to truths that the competition had spent 15 seasons carefully avoiding. The finals venue was transformed for the broadcast. The standard auditorium configuration replaced with an elaborate stage design that extended into the audience. Giant screens displayed contestant profiles and performance highlights, while enhanced lighting systems created immersive environments for each performance. Unprecedented viewership had attracted additional sponsors, their logos prominently displayed throughout the venue. Security was visible at every entrance, checking credentials and scanning for prohibited items, measures ostensibly for general safety, but primarily implemented in response to the threats against Amara. The audience that filled every seat represented the controversy's dual nature: supporters wearing blue ribbons scattered throughout the crowd, while others displayed small American flags, the symbol adopted by those who considered Amara's advancement political rather than merit-based. When Amara arrived backstage, she discovered another coincidence. Her performance had been scheduled first, a position generally considered disadvantageous, as viewers typically remembered and voted more heavily for later performers. Standard rotation from the semifinals. A producer explained unconvincingly when Rachel questioned the arrangement. The first performance, the judges' selection of What a Wonderful World, proceeded with unexpected smoothness. The technical difficulties that had plagued Amara's previous performances were notably absent, likely due to the intense scrutiny now focused on production decisions. She delivered a flawless interpretation that showcased her remarkable control and tonal quality, earning enthusiastic applause even from audience members who had come prepared to be critical. Richard and Veronica's feedback was glowing. While Bradley's suspended status left his chair conspicuously empty, a visual reminder of the controversy that had become inseparable from the competition itself. For her second performance, the original composition, Amara took the stage wearing a simple blue dress designed by Maria. Its only embellishment, a small embroidered plate in white thread near the shoulder. As the music began, a hush fell over the audience, the opening notes immediately establishing that this was not a typical competition piece. More Than a Plate began softly, almost conversationally, as Amara recounted asking for food in exchange for her talent. The chorus built with increasing emotional intensity, as the lyrics transformed from hunger for food to hunger for justice, recognition, and equal opportunity. By the final verse, Amara's voice had grown from vulnerable to powerful, the journey within the song mirroring her journey through the competition. When the final note faded, the audience response was immediate and overwhelming, people on their feet, many wiping away tears. The emotional impact, transcending the political divisions that had defined much of the discourse surrounding her participation. The response was so prolonged that producers were forced to delay the judges' feedback and cut to an unscheduled commercial break, a decision that would later be scrutinized as an attempt to diminish the performance's impact. It was during the third performance that Amara enacted her plan. As she took the stage for what was supposed to be her classical crossover piece, demonstrating versatility, she made eye contact with Dr. Thompson in the wings. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, their signal that the alternate plan was proceeding. The orchestra began playing the introduction to the approved selection, but as Amara's cue approached, she stepped forward and quietly addressed the conductor. "I'm changing my selection," she said, her voice firm despite her youth. "Please stop the music." Confusion rippled through the orchestra as the conductor hesitated, looking toward the production booth for guidance. Backstage, Cameron was already rushing toward the stage, but Veronica intercepted him, physically blocking his path. "Don't you dare," she warned, her voice low but intense. "Let her speak." The music faltered and stopped, leaving Amara standing in silence before the massive audience and millions of viewers at home. "I'd like to perform a different song," she announced, her voice steady. "One that truly demonstrates versatility by showing how music can speak truth even when systems try to silence it." Before Cameron could override the decision, Amara began singing a cappella, a haunting rendition of Strange Fruit, the Billie Holiday protest song about lynching. The choice was deliberate and devastating, connecting the competition's discrimination to America's longer history of racial injustice. Her young voice delivered the brutal imagery with a clarity that forced confrontation with uncomfortable truths, creating a moment of profound reckoning in what was supposed to be light entertainment. Halfway through the song, Bradley burst into the venue, having been alerted by supporters in the audience. He approached the judges' table, clearly intending to interrupt the performance, but found Veronica standing firmly in his path. As Amara's voice filled the silence with the song's most graphic imagery, Maya executed the second phase of their plan. From her position in the production booth, she overrode the standard broadcast feed, projecting onto the venue's massive screens a carefully edited montage of the discrimination Amara had experienced throughout the competition, the sabotaged microphones, the disparate resources, the leaked emails discussing how to eliminate her regardless of talent, and Bradley's numerous racially charged comments. The footage played silently behind Amara as she continued singing, creating a visual context that transformed her performance from individual expression to systematic indictment. Network executives rushed the stage in panic, attempting to cut the broadcast entirely, but Luis, who had anticipated this reaction, had established backup systems that maintained the live feed from secondary cameras. The audience began to understand they were witnessing not just a performance, but a carefully orchestrated exposure of the competition's fundamental inequities. As Amara concluded the song, the venue remained in stunned silence for several heartbeats before erupting in a combination of reactions, applause, shouts of support, and angry objections, creating a cacophony that reflected the nation's divided response to confronting systemic racism. Amara remained center stage, waiting for the noise to subside before speaking directly to the audience and cameras. "I came to this competition asking only for a plate of food if I sang well," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the continuing commotion. "What I discovered was a system that had already decided which voices deserved to be heard, based not on talent, but on factors beyond any contestant's control." The chant began somewhere in the back of the auditorium, "Let her speak," growing in volume until it became impossible for producers to ignore. Network president Jeffrey Blackwood rushed on stage, attempting to regain control of the situation. "We'll be taking a brief intermission," he announced, his corporate smile strained. "Miss Johnson will be addressed privately." "No," Amara interrupted, stepping away from his attempted escort off stage. "This conversation needs to happen publicly, just like the discrimination has happened publicly for 15 seasons. She turned to face the camera directly. "I have documentation of systematic discrimination against contestants of color throughout this competition's history. Not isolated incidents, but a pattern built into every aspect of production." Blackwood's expression shifted from forced pleasantness to calculation. Leaning close to Amara's ear, he murmured, "We're prepared to offer a very generous settlement if you'll conclude this performance. Immediately. His emphasis made clear he viewed her actions as theatrical rather than substantive. Amara's response, picked up by her still active microphone, was clear and unequivocal. "This isn't about money. It's about change." What followed was unprecedented in live television, the collapse of carefully constructed illusions about meritocracy and opportunity in real time before millions of viewers. The voting system crashed under the weight of unprecedented participation, as viewers across the country attempted to register their support for Amara in numbers that overwhelmed the technical infrastructure. Meanwhile, Bradley attempted to assert his authority, grabbing a microphone to defend himself and the competition. His statement, a combination of denial and deflection, that characterized Amara's actions as manipulating racial tensions for personal gain, only served to further illustrate the disconnect between the competition's public messaging and internal realities. As the broadcast devolved into chaotic but revelatory television, Veronica seized the moment for her own dramatic announcement. "Effective immediately, I am resigning as a judge on American Spotlight," she declared, removing her competition lanyard and dropping it on the judge's table. "Furthermore, I am announcing the creation of a new platform, Authentic Voice, dedicated to discovering and promoting talent across all demographics, with transparent criteria and equal resources for all participants." The announcement drew cheers from much of the audience, particularly those wearing blue ribbons in support of Amara. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Thompson made his way to the stage, joining Amara as the tumult continued around them. "I think it's time everyone knew," he said gently. "I was the anonymous donor who covered your grandmother's medical expenses and hospital bills." His revelation added another layer to the unfolding narrative. The competition had been taking credit for generosity actually provided by an outside supporter who had recognized Amara's extraordinary talent and circumstances. The broadcast ultimately concluded without declaring a winner, the competition's format and purpose having been fundamentally disrupted by the night's events. Network executives huddled in emergency meetings while social media exploded with reactions ranging from celebration of Amara's courage to angry denunciations of her hijacking the competition for political purposes. The epilogue to Amara's journey unfolded over the 6 months following the finals broadcast. Federal investigations were launched into fraudulent voting practices and civil rights violations within the competition, resulting in several high-level executives, including Cameron, facing legal consequences. The network implemented new industry standards for talent competition fairness, though critics noted these came only after their hand was forced by public exposure rather than moral recognition. Amara's grandmother recovered sufficiently to leave the hospital, and the family transitioned from homelessness to stable housing through performance opportunities that emerged following the controversy. Most significantly, with support from Victoria Banks and other industry leaders who recognized both her talent and courage, Amara established a foundation, helping talented homeless youth access artistic development opportunities without the exploitation she had experienced. The foundation, named simply A Plate and a Voice, provided not just material support but advocacy within an industry still struggling to address its systemic inequities. Perhaps the most powerful moment of this epilogue occurred during a national benefit concert for homeless youth, where Amara performed alongside established artists who had been vocal supporters during her competition journey. As she concluded her set, a young girl approached the edge of the stage, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty familiar to Amara. "If I sing well," the child asked, echoing Amara's original question, "will you help me find my voice too?" Amara knelt to meet the girl's eyes, her response captured by nearby microphones. "Your voice already exists. We're just going to make sure the world can hear it." The moment, shared widely across social media platforms, encapsulated the fundamental transformation Amara had catalyzed from a system where talent had to beg for basic necessities to one beginning to recognize its obligation to nurture voices from all backgrounds. The journey that began with a hungry child asking for a plate of food in exchange for her talent had become a movement demanding that society recognize the full humanity and potential of every voice, regardless of the body from which it emerged. Looking back on that transformative finals night, Many would later identify it as the moment when a fundamental contradiction in American culture was exposed, the gap between our celebration of meritocracy and the reality of who is permitted to benefit from their merits. Amara's legacy wasn't just her extraordinary voice, but her refusal to accept the terms of a system designed to limit which voices deserve to be heard. In demanding more than a plate of food, she had created space for countless others to demand more than tokenism or conditional acceptance. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up against an unfair system, even when it would have been easier to stay silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If Amara's journey touched you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of courage and transformation, and share with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters. Thank you for joining me on this journey through music, justice, and the power of refusing to be silenced. Until next time, may we all find the courage to sing our truth, especially when others would prefer we remain quiet.